Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. Joining us today are Lansing's two state senators. They are Rick Jones, a Republican from Grand Ledge, and Curtis Hertel Jr., a Democrat from East Lansing. Also with us is Kyle Malin from the Capital News Service Mears. Kyle, how about starting us off by bringing us up to date on roads?
Well, we still have them, luckily, even though some would argue that they're barely hanging on for dear life. But we have a roads proposal from the House that a special committee has been charged with taking a look at. This proposal from the Speaker of the House is in reaction, obviously, to Proposal 1 failing 80-20 a couple weeks ago. This road program is really supported by the idea that revenue in the state is going to continue to grow, and that over time we can continue to put more money into roads until we get to this magical number that the governor has set of $1.2 billion. There's also some cuts in there to help support this and to help move it along, some very deep cuts to the MEDC, for example, and then eliminating the earned income tax credit. And so these two ideas plus continued revenue down the road is what's on the table. Now, there's also other proposals obviously out there. There's a House member named Dave Rutledge out of Ypsilanti who has suggested increasing the gas tax again, 15 cents over a period of 3 years. That's another consideration and something actually the Chamber of Commerce is not opposed to. They have supported gas tax increases in the past, comparing them to user fees. And there's other proposals to increase fees on electric cars. And so these proposals are all on the table. The Senate has said that they're going to meet all summer to see what they can do about this. And I presume the House is going to do something maybe along those lines, but we haven't heard officially yet. We do have some polling information that came yesterday that Deno Research did with public sector consultants that showed a large number of voters, almost 70%, want lawmakers to come in over the summer and get this thing fixed as soon as possible. And I think that polling showed that only 5% said there's no rush on doing anything at all. So this is on the minds of voters, and it sounds like lawmakers are interested in trying to get something done.
All right, Senator Jones, what's palatable to you? Any of those ideas?
Well, I think almost anything. Now, my constituents overwhelmingly said that they wanted the 1%, but they wanted to go to roads and bridges.
Sales tax.
Yes, the 1% sales tax. Everywhere I went. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the 2/3 to put that on the ballot. So what plan did we get? We got the Gretchen Whitmer plan, which was somewhat of a Christmas tree. Voters overwhelmingly said no. So now it's going to be very difficult to put something back on the ballot. So we're going to have to come up with a solution. I think we'll find $400 million right away in this budget. You're going to see a lot of orange barrels this summer. But we need to work on a long-term solution.
Senator Hertel, what about you?
Well, first of all, I think the House plan doesn't make any sense. I think you can't commit future legislators to do something. I think we need to solve the problem now, not solve it in the future. And we've been historically kicking the can down the road. I think the House plan just continues to do that. I think it's offensive to do it on the backs of working poor, eliminating the earned income tax credit. I think is really on the backs of the working poor and doesn't. We in this state have shifted the tax burden to working men and women, away from corporations. We have the pension tax now. We have eliminated a lot of the tax credits that were available to working families. We need a road plan that is a balanced approach. So if it was me, we'd start with some things that I think we can all agree on. Get the warranty issue solved. Making sure that the roads that are fixed stay fixed. We make sure that higher fees on truckers, do something with the weight limits. I think we can start there and build out. But I think we have to build some trust with the voters first, and that's what we need to do. I can tell you this, I'm not going to vote for any road plan, and I don't think my caucus will, that's on the backs of working men and women. And if you look at the first thing that we did in this session, first bills introduced were eliminating the prevailing wage. That passed the Senate last week. I think it was a terrible plan for working women. Why would we attack their wages? Those that are doing these most skilled workers that are doing things for us. So in my opinion, we've already started out on a bad foot, and it's going to be harder to get an agreement that way.
Senator Jones, I want to talk to you about the earned income tax credit and where you stand on that. The National Conference of State Legislatures says that an average that 823,000 Michiganians got an average of $2,386 back from this credit. That's 8% of the population. Do you agree with Senator Hertel? It would be unfair to take that away from these people?
Well, I think we have to look at what is the EITC. It truly isn't a credit. It's more of a welfare program because you don't have to pay taxes to get it. Therefore, it's not truly a credit. And most of it that Michiganders get is from the federal government. The Michigan portion is a small portion. Should that be on the table? I think everything should be on the table, from movie credits to you name it. We need to look at everything in the budget and come up with a real solution.
Income tax, is that on the table?
I don't believe the votes are there for that. I think it would be more likely to be an increase to the 19 cents Michigan road tax.
Okay, what about increasing the Michigan business tax, you think, or the corporate income tax as it's called now? Should that be on the table?
Everything should be on the table. Do I think the votes are there for any tax increase? I think it's iffy.
Senator Hertel, you mentioned this idea of prevailing wage repeal. That passed the Senate here just last week. Does that poison the well as far as getting votes out of the Democratic caucus in the future for a possible tax increase on, let's say, a gas tax increase?
I think it makes it harder. I think, I'm committed to fighting for working men and women. The way that we passed it, I thought was offensive. Having committee one day, putting it out the next. The fact that we put a appropriation in that we all know didn't need to be in that bill to make it referendum proof, so that they were basically afraid of the voters going back to the ballot and repealing their decision. I think it makes it much more difficult to have trust working on both sides when the first thing we do in this discussion is attack working wages.
And then on top of this, now we're going to have a ballot proposal. It looks like a citizens initiative that's being organized by the Associated Builders and Contractors and the Freedom Fund. It's being highly funded, it looks like, and this could be on your desks for a vote later this summer or early fall. With that hanging over the head, how does that complicate, Senator Hertel, discussions on roads?
I think it complicates it quite a bit. We have, as a state, shifted the tax burden to these working men and women. Now we're going to cut their wages on top of it. And, I've gone to the training centers that are actually paid for by these prevailing wage dues. Most of our skilled workers, we talk about skilled workers, most of the actual training that goes on is done and paid for by union dues in this state. And if you go to a plumbers and pipe fitters training center, you see who's training for the jobs of tomorrow, being paid for. I just don't think that the other side has actually considered the actual consequences of having a less skilled workforce and less money for training for these people, and less safety standards that are there for people that have done prevailing wage.
What was your vote on prevailing wage repeal?
I voted for it. I think you can't take $250 million that's going into school buildings and government buildings and say, taxpayers, you have to pay that. I think there needs to be a little competition. But do I think the skilled trades are going to be hurting in this? Absolutely not. I've been out there to that training center for pipe fitters. My goodness, I couldn't do the math. Electricians won't have trouble finding well-paid jobs. Crane operators. Where you might see some cuts are the common labor, the guy leaning on the shovel. That could be that you could find somebody for less pay. But the skilled trades, we need more, and all this is going to do is create more jobs in the future, and the taxpayers get a better deal. Perhaps we'll have more money for schools, if this goes through.
The governor says the opposite, doesn't he? That prevailing wage is going to hurt the economy.
Governor says the opposite a lot of times on a lot of things. Sometimes Rick doesn't agree with Rick. I mean, that's the way it is.
But if you look at the studies, what we do see in states that don't have prevailing wage laws is a reduction in actual skilled workers that are actually living in that state because they don't want to work. We're in a competition for workers. We don't have enough welders as it is to do a lot of the projects we have in Detroit. And so people move out, wages go down, and the cost to the state don't go, and the taxpayer don't go down. Because
Well, you can pay off the bonding quicker, though, couldn't you? I mean, you could
No.
argue that the bonding that you put out for these school building projects, for example, you could pay them off quicker because you don't have the labor costs.
the labor costs are a very small percentage of the actual cost of actually building a school or building a road. So you're not actually making a big dent there. And again, the cost of those programs, and we didn't have prevailing wage for 2 years here in Michigan. The cost didn't go down. The cost of these prevailing wage states isn't significantly less. What you are doing is providing a lot more profit to the companies that are actually building these buildings. They're taking a lot more out of it. I mean, if we were going to really talk about saving the taxpayer money, why don't we limit the actual percentage of profit a corporation takes on a public building or a public road? Why don't we do that?
Can we do that, Senator Jones?
No, we need to do competition. This country was built on competition, and that is exactly what Americans want. We want safe buildings, we want them inspected properly, but we want a competitive market. Why would you want to pay more tax dollars for a school building or a courthouse or the county jail?
You don't. It's just not true. There's not been any study done by anybody who is outside of the people pushing for this law that shows that it is cheaper to build a school or a road in a state that does not have prevailing wage.
Patrick Anderson did a study, though. It showed $250 million saved.
I don't think that study actually used data from other states that actually would prove that. I think that you could take the labor numbers and just take that number out and assume that that's savings, but that doesn't mean that the bids are going to go down. Just because you change the business's cost model does not mean that their bids are going to go down. The free market actually sets the price of how things work.
Senator Jones, is this about the right wing of the Republican Party trying to score another win? We've had right to work, we've had teacher tenure reform. Is this kind of just the next step to try and hit the unions?
Absolutely not. Arlen Meekoff has been pushing this for a decade. This is something he truly believes in. And, frankly, what did Right to Work do? I have talked to numerous skilled trades union people in my office over the last 2 weeks since this came up, and they all said, Right to Work didn't do a thing to us. So let's look beyond all of the political nonsense and say, is this going to make a better situation where we actually have more workers here in Michigan?
I think that I'm glad some people came to your office and said that Right to Work didn't affect them personally, but I think that the majority of workers disagree with you.
How has it affected them?
Well, the reality is that we basically created a system where everyone gets the benefits of being in a union without having to pay for it. So if you're in a union shop before, no one was forced to join a union. That's a talking point that's just not true. You could choose to not be part of the union, but you had to pay for the actual representation.
But are we seeing
the
any
fees.
significant decline in union membership?
I think that first of all, we're not fully, we don't know the answer to that question because there's still a lot of contracts that are out there that were beyond the actual time when Right to Work was in effect. So you have to actually see where those contracts go in the future.
I had a member of the IBEW in my office. He said 2 have quit over several states in this region. 2 workers have left the union.
Yeah, and trades are a little different, to be honest.
I want to
Senator.
turn to an entirely different question, but you are both, to a greater or lesser extent, representing the city of Lansing in the legislature, in the Senate. And Mayor Bernero keeps saying, when you talk to him about the structural deficit, he said Lansing's in line to go bankrupt. Maybe not first in line, but in line to go bankrupt. But he is saying now that he cannot get the governor, the legislature doesn't seem to care. What is it on your radar screen, and what should be done about this? Senator Hertel?
No. It's certainly on my radar screen. Obviously, the city of Lansing financial struggles are certainly a concern for me, and they should be. That being said, I think that they have a financial health team. They've made plenty of suggestions to the mayor, and I think those have to be reviewed and decisions have to be made.
One of the biggest suggestions was to study selling the public utility, Lansing Board of Water and Light. Do you think it's time to study it?
Well, we can study things all we want. I think that the real concern I think people would have if we actually were going to sell the Board of Water and Light is what does it do to the actual ratepayers? Do rates go up if we sell the public utility? Can we get a fair price for it in the current market? And will the same environmental concerns that are frankly still there now get worse under a private company?
Do you think it'd be a political storm if the mayor and the financial health team, which is chaired by the former mayor David Hollister, said it's time to study it?
I think that we can study it all we want. I think if we were going to try to do it, there would certainly be a political storm.
So you think it'd be all right to start studying? Do you think they should start studying it?
Well, I'm certainly not saying that because I haven't actually reviewed the proposal. But I do think that talking about things should never be off the table.
All right, Senator Jones.
I meet with Verge all the time, anytime he wants to, and we don't agree on many things, but we do agree that Lansing could be another Detroit. Something must be done. It's time to get serious and not say some future casino 10 years from now is going to save the city. Need to look at all the costs and what do we have to cut. Let's be realistic. And I don't know if the political will is there with the city council, but it's time to get realistic.
Well, I don't know how much there is to cut, but what about studying the idea of selling the Lansing Board of Water and Light before a judge says you have to sell it?
I think everything has to be on the table, but I don't know why Lansing would want to sell their cash cow.
Is increasing revenue
Well,
sharing for the city?
The reason they'd want to sell it is then they can pay off this structural debt that takes multi-millions off the top every year.
But then they would lose all the millions coming into the city from it. It truly is a cash cow.
Well, what about revenue sharing? I mean, is increasing revenue sharing at the state level so more cities like Lansing can get more state dollars? Is that something that's on the table?
I've always supported better revenue sharing, always for the last decade. But if the money isn't there, it isn't going to happen.
And do you see it happening anytime soon? I mean, if the city of Lansing is waiting for more money from the state, what would your recommendation on that be?
I'd say don't wait. You need to have a plan that's realistic.
Is that a sad reality, Senator Hertel?
Well, unfortunately, I'm one of 11 members of the Democratic Caucus, but I do think that if you look at the history of what this governor and what the state has done, is the underfunding of cities has certainly led to much of their financial problems. So, we like to blame cities. And I'm not saying Detroit didn't have problems, and certainly there are decisions that could be made differently. But at the same time, we're part of the problem as well. We haven't done our job, and we haven't lived up to our promises to cities as well. And I think Lansing is certainly suffering that.
If you were the Senate Majority Leader, how much more would you put in for cities, percentage-wise? How much more do you think they need? 5%, 10%, 15, 20?
Well, if I was Senate Majority Leader, first of all, we wouldn't have the tax income problem we have right now. I think we should put a graduated income tax in front of the voters. I think we need to broaden the base of the corporate income tax so we're actually taxing all the corporations. We can even lower the actual rate if we actually were taxing more and we'd have more revenue. But until I had those projections of exactly what that is, I can't tell. But I think we should certainly be back where we were pre-Governor Snyder.
Senator Jones, you have had some success with a bill to change how minors in possession of alcohol would be treated. What would that bill do, and where's it going?
Well, I'm currently tweaking it, working with the district judges. And what I've found is a kid could be 17, 18, 19, or 20, because at 17 you're treated as an adult in this state. So one can of beer gets a criminal record the rest of your life. Or you're just walking on the sidewalk over at the university officer puts a breathalyzer in your face, says, aha, you've had a half a can of beer. Criminal record the rest of your life. I oppose that. And I've had numerous prosecutors tell me really at least the first offense ought to be a $100 civil infraction, you know, that plus mom and dad yelling at the kid, I think will take care of 95%.
You represent the Michigan State University in East Lansing. How do you feel about it?
I agree with Senator Jones, and I commend him for actually being willing to take on some issues like this where I think it's can be politically difficult. And I think that we have an obsession of being tough on crime in the state, and it's led to a lot of problems. The over-sentencing on a lot of regards. And I think that's one of the things we can look for in future budget savings is in the Department of Corrections. So yes, I support that, but I think it needs to be part of an overall look at our sentencing guidelines and the amount of people that we are actually putting in prison because of the strong idea that we have to be tough on crime. Tough on crime is great, but when we have nonviolent offenders that we're paying $35,000 a year to house in prisons across the state in a much higher rate than any of our surrounding states, doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Now let's substitute the word pot for alcohol. And we know, of course, Lansing and East Lansing and some other communities in the state have made it a misdemeanor or a civil infraction. But what about the state? What should the state do?
I support decriminalization. I think that's good. I think it's a good start. I believe that Michigan is moving towards legalizing marijuana.
Do you think it'll be on the ballot next year?
I think it will. I think the tax revenue would be a good thing for us. I think the one thing that's been holding us back for a long time is not having a test of whether someone's directly under the influence of it. But the science seems to be getting there now, which is a good thing. I think in reality, marijuana and alcohol are about similarly bad for people. But at the same time, I think the risks are pretty small.
Similarly bad, yet we don't hear of people dying in car crashes from pot.
Well, I mean, I think that certainly marijuana affects the ability to actually have response time just like alcohol does. I mean, it certainly slows you down if you're driving. And the other thing is that we know someone was under the influence of alcohol at that moment. We don't necessarily know with marijuana.
Senator Jones, your thoughts on what to do about pot in Michigan?
Well, the problem with legalizing pot is we didn't have a roadside test. So the officer knows with a breathalyzer almost instantly if he's got somebody that's drunk. He doesn't know if they're under the influence of pot. So he has to make that decision. Do I make an arrest? Do I go wake up a judge and a prosecutor and get a search warrant for blood and go through hours of work on a best guess hunch, basically? But I'm working on a pilot project right now. We do have the science here now. It'll be a saliva test. It's not invasive. And we will know if somebody's on THC or meth or opiates or whatever very quickly at a roadside test. Driving
here to the studio today, I saw yet another dispensary right down here in Washington at Mount Hope, I think. And made me wonder about, is the state going to get out in front of what Senator Hertel expects to happen, that it'll be legalized in Michigan, or are they going to continue to play catch-up as they have done with the medical marijuana bill?
Working on it right now. The House is going to send to me their version allowing dispensaries. Those dispensaries you're seeing are technically illegal right now. But a plan that would make them legal, make the product safe, something that's tested for things like bug spray and mold and things that would hurt a medical marijuana patient. So something safe, something more like a prescription. We're working on that right now, and I hope to have it done this summer.
Would you be voting no on marijuana legalization?
I don't believe we need another social drug, and I personally would be against it for recreation. I have no problem with the medical aspect.
All right, and then as far as medical marijuana in the THC in brownies, is that brownies or some other type of substance? You're okay with doing that, aren't you?
I don't have any problem with the edibles, and I understand there are a number of people that don't want to smoke and they shouldn't smoke it and they can get it in some other fashion. We're studying it very carefully. I'm not sure we can sell brownies and gummy bears and know that they're the proper amount of THC. It might be better if it comes in drops, and then you can put it on brownies or cookies or whatever you consume if you have a medical marijuana card.
The best way to dispense medical marijuana or just regular marijuana, in your opinion, would be what?
to have legal, licensed dispensaries that were inspected, were safe, have the product be safe. It has to be inspected for all the bug sprays and nasty stuff, and then allow people with a medical marijuana card to buy it.
Why do you think it's taken the state so long to get to this point where they seem to be finally getting serious about how to regulate it? Why? I mean, it's been legal since 2008, and isn't there reason to be concerned about what is the state going to do if voters say legalize it for recreational use?
Why is it taking so
Yeah.
long? Well, you have to have 2/3 to change anything, because it was a ballot initiative. So it has to be
Right.
something that everybody agrees on, or at least 2/3. So that makes it a lot more difficult to deal with.
And the 2008 proposal was written poorly. It didn't. It didn't really. If we're going to treat marijuana as a drug that is for prescription use, we should regulate it like a drug for prescription use. It didn't do that. It basically. I think there's some people in the marijuana movement that would want their cake and eat it too as well. The reality is, if we're going to make something legal and we're going to tax something, there has to be a regulatory structure. And it can't be the wild, wild west.
And it's going to happen, isn't it? So why not get out in front of it? Why not put on the table not just what's going to happen with medical marijuana, but what's going to happen in Michigan when it's legalized? Because it's just a matter of time, isn't it?
But I think there are groups working on that, and I think we should. I think that we need to have proper testing procedures. If we're going to treat it like a recreational drug, we have to treat it like alcohol, where there are testing procedures, regulations. You actually have a private organization that's responsible for that, for all of that, with state testing and oversight. I think that marijuana will be legalized in Michigan at some point. I think it's just a matter of time. But we have to realize that if we're going to do that, it has to be done in a well-regulated way.
All right, Kyle.
Senator Jones, the governor came out with his criminal justice message just earlier this week. I wanted to see what stuck with you. We only got a couple minutes here left, but what stuck with you as something that you'd really like to pursue out of that message?
Taking care of seniors in prisons. We're spending millions of dollars. I've heard of one case where we spent $1 million on one man, just one inmate, because of the illnesses. So we need to look at the seniors in prisons, and can we either get them out, or can we develop some sort of senior home for them to go to where we can get help with the cost from Medicare.
Okay, and then have them guarded somehow, but they're not being they're not technically behind bars.
Not truly in prison anymore, out in a safe, home.
Okay, and then what about his idea on exonerations? You had to be happy to hear he's at least considering when people are exonerated, maybe the state needs to help these people out.
Yes, the bill that I support and co-sponsored says if you're improperly convicted, and you spend several years in prison, certainly we should offer you $60,000 per year, and then you have a choice. You can sue, probably wait 10 years to see if you're going to get anything, or take that money and get on with your life, start your life over.
What did you think about, did you follow Governor Snyder's criminal
We're
justice?
almost out of time.
Absolutely, and I think I'm glad the governor's looking at doing something here. Our prison costs are way too high. We can talk about being tough on crime all we want, but we actually have to at some point realize the fiscal problems, and locking people up for nonviolent offenders for the amount of time we have really doesn't make sense.
All right, Senators Jones and Hertel, Kyle Malin, thank you all for being on City Pulse. We'll be back next week. Have a great Memorial Day weekend.